So I'm really pleased to be here today, and because I want to say that it's almost like, after Carolyn gave that, I should say I have a son with Tourette's, and I have two rare diseases. I won't go into it, but I started my career at the FDA and helped to implement the Orphan Drug Act. It was my research that led to the 1984 and the 1985 amendments to the Orphan Drug Act, and I drafted... So I've been at this for a long time. And it turns out that I feel that with the 21st Century Cures Act, that I was invited in a bipartisan way by both the Republican majority of the House Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee and the Democratic minority to speak at the inaugural hearing that they held in May 2014. So I've been with this law, the 21st Century Cures law, since its birth. And so I'm very pleased to be back here today to talk about some of those elements. I have 5 elements that I think really represent the patient focus of the 21st Century Cures Act. And I'm here to talk not only to you, patient advocates, but also to the congressional staffers, member of Congress, to exhort you in terms of oversight and maybe expanding some of these provisions. So I've got 5 provisions to talk about. The first one I'm going to talk about the longest because I think it's the most important, and that is the provision in the 21st Century Cures Act that requires the FDA to actually take notice of patient experience. This is radical thought. Why is it so radical? Because when our first Pure Food and Drug Act was enacted in 1902, so 115 years ago, it never included the word patient. In fact, it wasn't until the FDASIA law in 2012 that the Congress had the wisdom to recognize that patients have a role in this. I mean, aren't the patients the ultimate stakeholder for our medicines? I mean, that's why we're developing medicines. But the word patient never appeared in any drug law until 2012. And when it appeared in 2012, made its initial appearance, it kind of just snuck its nose under the proverbial tent. It wasn't a major part of that 2012 law. So in the 21st Century Cures Act, we actually have recognition of the voice of the patient. And the first thing is that it recognizes those. Does that? No, those can't see. The folks over there. Okay. So I'm going to say a little bit more since you can't see it. So what it does is the law requires the FDA to, every time it approves a new drug, to actually record how patient experience made a difference. Think about that. 115 years ago, the word patient never appears for 115 years. And then we've got to the point where now the Congress has said, you, the FDA, every time you approve a drug, you're required to tell us, the public, how the patient experience made a difference in what you did. Really huge. So how does it make a difference? So I'm going to give you 4 examples of how patient experience makes a difference in getting new drugs through and how it could be important with the 21st Century Cures Act. First example is, this is a picture from the April 2016 Advisory Committee for a Drug for Muscular Dystrophy. This is a picture of Christine McSherry testifying before the Advisory Committee during the core presentation of the sponsor. Why is that important? If you've ever been to an FDA advisory committee, and I've been to hundreds, you know that the advisory panel listens carefully to what the FDA says in its core presentation and to what the sponsor says in its core presentation. And sure, yes, the patients have an opportunity to speak during an open public hearing, and that's when the panel members are eating their lunch and fidgeting with papers. So this was the first time in history that the patient advocate got to speak during the core presentation. So there are things going on. It's almost a convergence. See this confluence of events, the rising voice of the patient, is that we see the patient voice taking on more prominence in ways such as this, and we see Congress recognizing the role of the patient and mandating that the FDA pay attention to the patient voice. So this is one thing that those in Congress can look at. Here's another case, Tiffany House, a woman with Pompe disease. This is at the FDA's first ever Rare Disease Day on March 1st, 2012. If you look carefully at the picture, you see a little red tie. That's this guy, Frank Sasinowski, who's going to speak next. But anyways, it turns out that at that very first presentation to the FDA on Rare Disease Day 2012, Tiffany House explained to the FDA that she was one of the first patients ever embedded into an FDA review. That is, while the FDA was reviewing the data, Tiffany House was invited in as a special government employee, and she was part of the FDA review team. I went to the FDA reviewers afterward and said, "What did you learn from Ms. House?" They told me, "Frank, we thought that to have a drug make a difference in a patient's life, it'd have to show some improvement from their baseline. So after a year, are they doing better? And if they're not, maybe we shouldn't approve the drug." Tiffany House taught us that with a disease that is like this, when every day you're going to get worse, if you can be stable, huge difference. Huge difference. FDA learns we can improve drugs because of what this patient taught us. We can improve drugs when for an irreversibly, unilaterally deteriorating condition, if a patient is stable, it's a win. Win. So again, the power of the patient voice. Here's another voice of the patient. The Huntington's Disease Society of America did a survey of 200 neurologists who treat Huntington's patients and 200 Huntington's patients. They said, what's the most important thing? What's the most important expression in a patient's lives of their condition? The neurologist said things like their chorea, the shaking, or their inability to speak clearly. Patients didn't even say inability to speak clearly even mattered to them, because to them they could speak just fine. Person might have trouble understanding, but that's their problem, not my problem. So what the patient said is the most important thing to them is cognitive function, executive function, ability to hold a job. Doctors didn't even rate that. So for 115 years, our drugs were being developed and evaluated by the doctors, the investigators, and did they have a clue as to what's really important to patients? Guess not. Not always. So that's why the patient voice, that's why the 21st Century Cures is so groundbreaking, to finally require FDA to look at the patient experience. And this is the third way, and there's one more, and that is externally led patient-focused drug development meetings. The FDA has been holding these since the 2012 Fidation Law, but now they just started having patients come forward, and you as patient organizations can ask the FDA to hold an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. My colleague here, James Valentine, was the moderator for the first ever patient-focused drug development meeting led by an external organization, the myotonic dystrophy organization, back in September of 2016, and there are many more. Ron, have you guys done one? Have you?
We'll do one with James on June 2nd.
That's it. June 2nd, Frederick's Ataxia is going to have one. So if you're in a patient organization, this is another way of the rising power of the patient voice. And this gets reduced into a voice of the patient report that the FDA recognizes. So these are all different ways that those of you who are here from Congress, when you're looking at this provision of this 21st Century Cures law, and you're looking at oversight hearings, how did the FDA do? Keep looking to see whether or not the FDA is incorporating these kind of elements. See how the FDA is doing when they're reporting to you on how much are they integrating the patient experience into their reviews in these various ways. So I want to spend the most time on that. I've got 4 other examples of the patient, what's important to patients. One, the Every Life Foundation was really talking about qualification of new drug development tools. And so the Every Life Foundation was helping put this on, sponsoring us. And the 21st Century Cures Act did require the FDA to look at qualification of new tools, biomarkers, clinical outcome assessments. And why did the 21st Century Cures, why is it important? Because the FDA's been having this program, qualification program, for 8 years. Here's a chart that shows, and I hope that the Every Life Foundation, Vignesh, if you can make our slides available, since people can't see them and stuff, so that you can go to probably the Every Life Foundation website and download these later on. They're on the website. Okay, good. Thanks, Vignesh. So you can see the chart, because you can't see it very well, and some you can't see it at all. But there's a chart up here that shows what the FDA's done in 8 years, and it's basically qualified 6 biomarkers and 2 clinical outcome assessments. Not done a heck of a lot. to advance the field. So the 21st Century Cures Act is exhorting the FDA to do more. Those of you in Congress who are here, again, an oversight question. How are you doing, FDA, at getting new qualified tools for patients? Priority review voucher, the rare pediatric disease priority review voucher, very important. I was involved in about 7 of the 8 that have gotten priority review vouchers under this program. Very important program. It was going to expire on December 30th, 2016. The 21st Century Cures Law extended that to September 2020. Very important. We'll see how it's doing and reporting back to Congress on that. The regenerative advanced therapies. Now this is something, those here from Congress, I want to say you made a mistake. I used to write FDA regs. We were sensitive to acronyms. You called this a regenerative advanced. Our law firm did we did a webinar on this on January 12th, a 90-minute webinar, and I said, please, we had 400 people sign up to in 400 different sites, and a lot of them were at FDA, and I said, if any FDAs are out there and you're writing the regs, reverse it. Call it the advanced regenerative therapy so I can talk for the rest of my career about art instead of rats. Really. But what is this about? It's for advanced therapies. It's especially for cellular and tissue therapies. That's what it's for. It's to encourage the FDA to when these therapies, a cell or tissue therapy is for a serious or life-threatening condition where there's an unmet medical need, they can be designated as a rat. I wish it would be designated as an art. And so then you're designated. What does that get you? That means that the FDA will give you accelerated approval. It'll allow you the opportunity to see if you can get accelerated approval. And they reduced the burdens in the law for accelerated approval. They made the post-approval requirements less onersome. So this is very important. Now, there are 2 things that I wanted to say about this, especially to people of Congress. One I was going to say is that this is one of the things that I was exhorting in my May 2014 testimony. I was saying the FDA should open up and have more accelerated approval beyond cancer and AIDS. It should use accelerated approval for rare diseases. This is necessary. So, this is very limited. It's just for cellular and tissue therapies. A lot of people coming in with platelet disorders or Friedreich's ataxia won't have a cellular or tissue therapy. So I think Congress, you should think about expanding this. This is a great tip of the spear. This is a good start. What we should do is expand it beyond just looking at cellular and tissue therapies. The technical amendment could be, I'm already getting people saying, does gene therapy apply? Because the unit within the FDA that controls cellular and tissue also controls gene therapy. So the question is this meant to apply to gene therapies? And it's unclear. So one technical amendment would be for Congress to come in with a cleanup amendment that says and clarifies this is supposed to apply to gene therapy. But a bigger issue is there are a lot more innovative, creative therapies than just cellular and tissue. I had the good fortune to work on a drug to treat spinal muscular atrophy. It got approved December 23rd, 2016 in record time. It was the fastest FDA approval before this had been for cystic fibrosis, the drug Kalydeco, which was 102 days. The FDA approved this in 92 days. And it's for floppy babies. It's for spinal muscular atrophy. What's a floppy baby? Floppy baby is a baby who's born, has this condition, never acquires any motor milestones. Can't even lift its head, can't roll over. Never. So and succumbs usually at age 9 to 12 months. Horrible for the infant, horrible for the families. I was part of the 6 people who were tasked with unblinding the data. We were given the data and we were tasked with the decision, should the study continue or should we stop it because it's good enough, the results are good enough for approval. I opened my data book and I cried. You can see I cry easily. But I cried because I immediately saw the placebo infants were doing just like every floppy baby. They were not acquiring any motor milestones, nothing. The babies who were on the drug, this antisense oligonucleotide, they were not only lifting their heads and rolling over, they were crawling, some of them sitting up, they looked normal. This is an advanced therapy. And Congress should think about expanding this special designation of rat, please make it art, expand this designation to make it for other advanced therapies, like antisense oligonucleotides, and other advanced therapies. And the last topic is targeted or platforms for rare diseases. The 21st Century Cures Law provided that there could be targeted or platform approvals. What does that mean? I said cystic fibrosis before. Kalydeco applies to the gene defect in 4% of cystic fibrosis patients in this country. That means 96% it won't help. So if you come along and you have another therapy that's built on the same mechanism of action, the same sort of idea, but for a slightly different related gene defect in cystic fibrosis, shouldn't you get faster approval because you can rely upon the Kalydeco, the proof that you got that it works in these 4%, to get the next one approved? And so that's what this is about, this targeted, therapy for rare diseases. And so and I think that this could be applied to many more things. And in fact, in like mitochondrial diseases, like FA and stuff, like if there's a friend of ours who's on the board of NORD with us, Chuck Mohan, a United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, he says there's over 200 mitochondrial diseases, often many of them with less than 100 patients in the United States. You can't do new therapies for the population. Well, if you've shown in a number of these mitochondrial diseases that it works, can't you rely upon that data to get the other ones approved? So there's a lot. Congress has done a wonderful job with it. It was a great bipartisan effort by Congress. Oh, it took 3 years. You see that. It took almost 3 years to get it there. So I want to thank anyone from Congress who's here, any staffer who had a hand in that. Thank you very much. But there's more work to do. Thank you.